Well, hi guys, it's that time. It's our Bible teaching snippet of the day. Well, today I want to do one more teaching out of the Gospel of John, and I'm going to teach out of John chapter 8, verses 12 through like 20 or 22. But before I do, I want to just talk a little bit more and bring together what I talked about the last two teachings. I taught the Feast of Tabernacles, where Jesus just comes out of nowhere, right? All of the Jewish people would be there celebrating this Feast of Tabernacles. And on the 8th day, the greatest day, Jesus steps out in public in front of all of the Jewish people, as well as the leaders, the hypocrites, all of those men that was controlling people, the Pharisees, the scribes, the priests, the high priest, all of them would have been there. And Jesus just steps out and boldly screams to the crowd so everybody can hear him that if they're thirsty, hey, I'm the one you come to. I am the living water. That's what Jesus was declaring about himself. So after he does this, in verse 45 through 53, which I did not teach in detail, but the leaders, now that that part of the feast is over, they go off privately to try to figure out how they can find Jesus, get him and stone him and kill him. And Nicodemus, who is meeting Jesus at night, takes up for Jesus and says, what, are we going to judge this man without knowing if he's guilty or not? And so then they turn on Nicodemus and get mad at him. But then in chapter 8, that's where we see the account of the woman who was drug out into the crowd of people naked, because it was a big setup, okay? Let me tell you what is generally taught or believed about this verse. This woman was probably having an affair with one of the Jewish leaders, okay? And they knew where they were and what they were doing, and that's why they could so easily catch them together in the very act of adultery. And that's why they didn't bring the man with them either, because they all had planned on this happening, and once that started, they would the other men would come in and catch them and surprise them, and they would grab her and drag her out in the street so they could set Jesus up to teach against the Mosaic law, which would turn the people against Jesus and give them the opportunity to try him and find him guilty of breaking the Mosaic law. So that was the setup there, okay? And the reason the man wasn't brought out as one of the guilty parties is because he was in the big scheme of things to begin with. So now, I want to connect something, though, that I think is very interesting. I told you yesterday that I believe that Luke wrote this account because it's his style of writing, his use of the Greek language. It matches the writing style of the Gospel of Luke, and it does not match the writing style of John, which there have been analysis done on their writings, okay? So, and to even further make it more believable that it was probably written by Luke is because Luke wrote a lot about women. I said that yesterday. You should research that, or I should do a teaching about how much Luke loved women and the notoriety he gave them in his gospel. And he elevates women to an equal level with men, which is odd for that day, by the way. Okay, so Luke really had a lot of love and compassion and respect for women when you see it from that perspective, reading in the Gospel of Luke. And the reason I believe also that Luke wrote it is because there are manuscripts out there that have it in the Gospel of Luke. Now, today I want to add a little to this, though. One of the reasons that I believe that it was added in where it is added, which is John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. I'm going to connect this, and I believe that the scribe who put it in this section of Scripture did it for this reason. Jesus comes out on the 8th day and publicly declares that he is the fountain of living water, and when any man thirst, they should come to him, okay? That was in John chapter 7, verses 37 through about 39, okay? Now, in this account of the woman caught in adultery, or should I say set up to be caught in adultery, if Jesus literally and actually was, and I do believe this as well, if Jesus was writing in the sand the scripture of Jeremiah 17:13, if he was writing that scripture in the sand, at the end of Jeremiah 17:13, it talks about that the people who reject the Lord, they would be written in the dirt or in the sand. And it also makes a reference, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. Okay, so I think the scribe that added it in here understood Jesus declared himself as the fountain of living water, and he also understood in that day that Jesus wrote in the sand that scripture, and he was connecting this fount of living water in Jeremiah 17 to what had just happened at the Feast of Tabernacle, okay? So let me just to be clear, I'm going to read Jeremiah 17:13 again for anybody that didn't hear yesterday's teaching. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be ashamed. Those who depart from me shall be written in the dirt, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. And so this is what God was declaring about himself in Jeremiah 17:13. God is talking here. And then Jesus writes that scripture down, and he's actually letting these leaders know, you're rejecting me, and I am the fountain of living waters, guys, okay? So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to do real quick, I won't take up too much more time, but I want to talk a little bit about Jesus declaring that he's the light of the world, okay? And this is in verse 12 through 20. And I'm going to read this in the Passion Translation. And it says, Jesus then said, I am the light to the world, and those who embrace me will experience life-giving light, and they will never walk in darkness. And the Pharisees were immediately offended. You're just boasting about yourself, since we only have your word on this. It makes your testimony invalid. Jesus responded, just because I am the one making these claims doesn't mean they're invalid. For I absolutely know who I am, where I have come from, and where I am going. But you Pharisees, religious leaders, and scribes have no idea about what I am saying, for you've set yourself up as judges of others based on outward appearances, but I certainly have never judged others in that way. For I discern the truth. I am not alone in my judgments, for my Father and I have the same understanding in all things, and he has sent me to you. Isn't it written in the law of Moses that the testimony of two men is trustworthy? Then what I am saying about who I am is true, for I am not alone in my testimony. My Father is the other witness, and we testify together of the truth. Okay, I want to show you in Scripture what Jesus was saying, that he was the fulfillment of what had been written about him in the Old Testament. The Old Testament and what the Father had decreed and declared all through the prophets was his second witness. Jesus brought himself as a witness to what the Father wrote, and the Father was a witness to what Jesus was saying, and that he was sent by the Father. So I want to, before I close today, I want to read portions of Isaiah 9, starting in verse 1. And now look, this is Jesus here saying that that the Father testified to him in the Old Testament. So let me read to you the fulfillment of what Jesus was saying, because let's remember, they were talking about earlier how Jesus could not be the Messiah because he came from Galilee. And this testimony right here, or should I say Old Testament prophecy, is going to declare that Jesus is going to actually come out of Galilee as well as being born in Bethlehem. We know he was born in Bethlehem, but he's going to be in the Galilee area. And this right here in Isaiah chapter 9 clearly says that. And these leaders of the law should have known this prophecy as well, but they didn't see it because they were blinded by their own religious beliefs, okay? So here we go. I'm going to just pick up here and read this. By the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, in Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. And those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. Guys, I'm telling you, he stood up and said, I am the light of the world. And right here was a prophecy that out of Galilee, all around where the pagans and the Gentiles are, there would be a great light, and that people would no longer walk in darkness because the light will shine. And Jesus said, I'm the light. My Father told you about me, and I'm here. That's what Jesus was telling these people, guys. I'm telling you, you got to fall in love with Jesus, and you got to fall in love with the words written in red. And when you do, Scripture will just take over your life and give it a whole new meaning, because He is truly the way, the truth, and the life. Find Jesus. That's my message today. Find Jesus. He is the way. I love you guys, and I'll see you on Monday. Bye-bye.